ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. May we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we work together with vigor, and may there be no dislike between us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto all. Dear friends, it was August 2015, which is just a couple of months back. There was a display of Mother Kali shown in the Empire State Building. So through social media, I saw it, but didn't pay much attention. Until recently, Swamiji asked me to speak today on Mother Kali. And then I remember, the first thought that flashed in my mind was why Mother Kali was shown on such an iconic building in New York, in their commercial district, and who cared to do it and why. So I went back and I reviewed some of the videos, and what I found was it was done by CERN, which is a reputed research institute. They're famous recently for all the work they have done in God particle. So, and they did it for pollution, but when I looked at to prevent pollution and awareness on pollution and so forth, I obviously could not correlate that with Mother Kali. And again, when I saw the video, there are multiple videos, and there were many, many interpretations of that digital display. It was a gorgeous display. I was shocked by those interpretations. So now let's look at the video, and we'll discuss why I was so surprised.
Moment when Goddess Kali took over the Empire State Building in New York. Regarded as Goddess Kali is the goddess of death, but the death of an ego. Of all the forms of devil, she is considered to be the most compassionate one because she provides moksha or liberation to her children, and now people in New York would know about her. Goddess Kali was displayed onto the iconic Empire State Building in New York, which is considered to be the tallest building and also the key piece of NYC skyline. Empire State Building had started a new trend to feature extinct species across the world, but featuring Goddess Kali was a class apart. Artist Android Jones is the who designed the portrait of Kali. Why Goddess Kali? Because she dealer to the destruction and of evil. Android thought it would be a good idea to feature to her, hence it I opines that she would work as the epitome to fight dangers and pollution.
This one, and there are many other such videos. In all of them, she's described like this one also, a demon. And unlike other demons, she's a compassionate demon and so forth. She's the epitome of death and destruction. Death and destruction in the meaning of what recently happened in Paris. Not a very nice thing. It's terrorism and so forth. So I was shocked and almost feeling like a rebuttal. But then I asked myself that why so? Why did they think that way? And I asked myself this question: who is Kali after all? And it felt to me that maybe each of us have a different concept of Kali. So I'm sure most of all of you know about Kali, and our concepts may be varying from one to another. And so why don't we take up this study using some of the authentic sources and see who Kali is, explore her origin, the origin of the concept of Kali. When was it first conceived, the Kali, and then how the idea evolved over time, and also what is the relevance of Kali in present times, and last but not the least, what is the importance of Kali in our lives? What is her relevance in our lives? How can we evolve and fulfill our lives by bringing Kali, Mother Kali in our lives? So let's look at Mother Kali, the imagery first. Most of the goddesses, the godheads and goddesses in the Hindu tradition have very benign look. They are very beautiful, they're very nicely ornamented, and they have beautiful smile and so forth. They're sitting in a throne. But if you look at Kali, the goddess, it's a contrast. She represents fierce and the terrible. She is standing in a cremation ground, actually in a battlefield, where there are lots of demons, as you can see in the picture. The lots of demons, there are dead bodies all around. She is holding a sword which is smeared with blood. And then she's holding a trident. Her garland is not a beautiful garland of jewels and flowers and so forth. What it is, her garland, it is of severed heads, human heads or devil's head, whatever. And she is standing on Shiva, who is considered her divine consort. Shiva is lying like a corpse. So everything about her, and another thing is her complexion is dark, and she has no clothing as such other than a girdle of hands, as you can see, hanging around her waist. So that's Mother Kali, that's the imagery of Kali. Quite terrible for anyone looking at it for the first time, and it is not very unusual to think of her not to think of her as the conventional goddess. And yet, as we see the history of Indian religion and the evolution, there are so many saints and sages who have attained liberation just by worshipping Kali. Most notably in the recent times, Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, they attribute all their spiritual attainments to Goddess Kali. How is it possible? So that's what we are going to explore today. She's instead of, let alone terror, she's described as someone who unfolds the doors of peace, towards peace, knowledge, fulfillment, and so forth. So let's look at that now. But before we go any further, I just wanted to bring our attention to the fact that in Hindu tradition, the whole of Hindu tradition, when we interpret, it is founded on three main tenets. One is the principle, parable, and practice. They are not orthogonal, they are quite complementary to each other. So I didn't mind showing them connected in the form of a triangle. So they are connected, and together we can use it to understand the various concepts of Hinduism. Actually, if we take principles are the concepts. They are eternal, and they are the foundation. They don't change with time. The technical word for it is Shrutis, and the Shrutis refer to the Vedas, which is really the foundation of Vedanta, the Vedas and the Upanishads. Principles are the concepts, and they never change. The next is parables. Parables are stories, myths, legends, and how they come into being. We know how powerful stories are. Many of these principles that are put forth are very abstruse, and these stories help. I think we know in our regular life also the power of stories. When we tell a story, it is so easy to understand a concept. So the story became the medium, and there's lots of stories, and these stories change over time. They're designed for the audience. So the audience, as the audience changes with time, with demographics and so forth, these stories also keep changing. And these stories are called, the technical term is Smritis. And now they keep evolving. And the most recent Smritis we can think of is, many of you know, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the life of Sri Ramakrishna, the life of Sarada Devi, the life of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. We can think of those, or let's say the life of Ramana Maharshi. Just by studying their life, we understand a lot of principles, and so these are the evolving nature. That is the evolving nature of the parables or the stories. I think I said they're called Smritis. And then the last is practice. The third one, not last exactly, a pretty equally important aspect is practice. Again, the basis of this religious practice is the religion is that it is not a matter of talking, it is a matter of realization. And how we convert the concepts into integrated in our own life and benefit from that is by practicing them. The technical word there is again yoga, and so basically how we integrate it, just to get the concept is, I'm reminded of Sri Ramakrishna, what he used to say. It is like, let's say we can keep talking about milk all our lives. I mean, milk is like that and so forth, we can write essays on milk. But unless we drink it, we really don't get anything out of milk. I mean, we do not get the nourishment or anything. So from that aspect, practice is most important. That's how we integrate all these principles and parables. So we can use these almost as an instrument, a tool, a lens, if you will, to study the various concepts of Hinduism, and in this case, goddess Kali. Let's use this, using this three-sided tool, let us see how we can understand Kali. Now, as we begin, we have to go back in that geographical transition in that land of India, which looks different from what geographical and political India is now. It includes many other territories around it, like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Burma, Tibet, Sri Lanka. Everything used to be part of the peninsular, the Indian subcontinent. And this is the Vedic period, which is, as shown, 1500 to 500 BC, about 4,000 years back. So this is why we started there, is that is the earliest record of civilization and also religion in India. Before that, there were the aborigines. And what we are trying to do here is to trace the origin of the concept of divine motherhood and Kali. So what we find there was, even in the pre-Vedic age in India and also in other places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, Crete, and so forth, there was a concept of a feminine god and a mother god who is all-powerful. But in Vedas, what we see is there's a mention of, in Vedas, in the Vedic period, the main text, the main civilization was centered around the development of the Vedas, which are very ritual-centric, and in that it is predominated by the male gods, and each god and the gods are attached to the different powers of nature. For example, there's a god for rain, there's a god for fire, there is a god for wind, and so forth. But then sprinkled in that are also goddesses. So the first one is, first goddess is Aditi. Aditi is considered the mother of all gods. And then there is Prithvi, that is the goddess attributed to earth. Saraswati. Saraswati is the goddess of wisdom. She is also known by the names Medha and Vak. She is not only the goddess of wisdom, but everything that goes with knowledge, the ability of speech, music, and so forth. And then we find the references of Durga, Uma, Ambika. They are related to valor, courage, and power. And there are hymns dedicated to these goddesses, some of them we chant here, like the Durga Suktam, then the Medha Suktam, and also there's the Devi Suktam. And there is another god who is connected with the concept of night, called Ratri. Ratri means night. Now, that is the closest as we can get to Mother Kali, because she is dark, and that's pretty much the only, the closest reference we get of Mother Kali, the Ratri, the goddess of Ratri. But at the same time, in what happens in this Vedic period, and I'll quote Swami Vivekananda here. What he said is that the people from whom the Vedas came were intent on following principles, discovering principles. So when we look at the Vedic period, is replete with principles. They didn't so much care about working out the details of the forms and so forth, but they went deep through meditation and other contemplation into the depths of the concepts on the principles. So many principles came into being during this period, and we will study some of them. But the concept of divine motherhood also emerged during this time. So all these goddesses, Aditi, Prithvi, Saraswati, and so forth, although they have their own domain, they are the goddess of, there is the underlying unity. One is the feminine aspect of, and also the motherhood aspect. Now, when we say motherhood, we are doing a very broad generalization. In specific cases, there may be variations in what motherhood stands for, but on a very general basis, motherhood stands for creativity because mothers give birth. The creation aspect is there, and also the aspect of the sustenance, compassion. These are some of the attributes of the motherhood. But again, when we think about divine motherhood, the divinity associated with motherhood, there's a difference between the divine mother and the normal human mother. And what is that? When we see at a human mother, there is always, there are two things. One is there is always a grandmother. The mother was born from a grandmother, and there's the great-grandmother, and so forth. But in divine motherhood, she is primordial. Nothing existed before her. And that's why the other name also we find in the Vedas is Adya, which means the most ancient one. She is the first one that came into being. There's no mother of the divine mother. The other thing is everything, plants and ants and whatever, living, non-living, movable, immovable, everything came from that divine mother, unlike a human mother who gives birth to a few children. So these are some of the differences. So this concept of divine motherhood we see evolving during the period of the Vedas, and there are some other principles which we see evolving, again relevant to our discussion on Kali. One is that Vedanta, or the Upanishads, both Vedanta and Sankhya philosophy, believes in a very unique concept, that is the unity of two principles, the Purusha and the Prakriti. Purusha stands for awareness, consciousness, the conscious principle, and the physical principle. So everything that we see in the universe and we don't see in the universe, the visible and the invisible, the movable and the immovable, everything that changes is consolidated under the concept of Prakriti. And when we talk about a Prakriti, that there is two aspects. One is the individual, like me as a person, the individual Prakriti, which means nature, character, whatever. And then there's this cosmic Prakriti. So these concepts emerged during this time, and this is very unique. That when we look at reality, when we look at the Godhead, it's not just it's a duo. Like there's this unchanging awareness, consciousness, which shines through, and then there's that concept of matter, consciousness and matter is what they termed as Prakriti. Another concept that evolved during this Vedanta, during this Vedic period, is what is known as the Maya. What is Maya? It is actually referred as the magic power of God. I mean, how everything came into being. But Maya also we can think of as a veil, as a covering, something that covers the reality. We know that whatever we're experiencing, there's something beyond. What is beyond, we are not able to see. And also, not just covering, just giving a sense of delusion. So it's something like, let's say, darkness, when it is dark, it's dawn, it's dusk, and the sun went down, and there's low visibility. We look at in our lawn, there is a watering pipe coiled up. We look at it, and it looks like a snake. And the moment we see the snake, we start to feel afraid, and everything, all the reactions sets in. So this world is also the world as we see is not what it really is, and that is due to Maya. Now this concept first started in Vedic age, and then much later during the period of the Buddhist and the Shankara, it grew much more, but that is where we first see the concept of Maya. So let's just remember this for now. These are just placeholders. As we proceed, we'll see how they all come together. And I have to mention that till now, we have not really in the Vedic age found any reference of Kali. Then is the epic age, and one thing I want to mention is that I've put them sequentially mostly to see that there's a progression, that there's an evolution in time. I did not delve too much into the historicity or the exactness of the purpose is not to get too much into history here. So then comes there's some overlap also in terms of the periods. So next is the epic. Now in Indian religion, we see the epic, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Now in Ramayana and Mahabharata, these are the two main epics. There we see the mention of incarnations, where God takes birth and lives like human beings. Ramayana and Mahabharata is all about the stories of Rama and Krishna. And there is a little mention of Kali. As of course, there's this concept of Radha and Sita, who kind of represents the divine motherhood to some extent, but otherwise there's not so much mention of other goddesses. And Kali is very briefly mentioned as a warrior, a fighter goddess. And then the next is the Puranic period. Now the period of the Puranas is where, remember our triangle, the parables become very prominent. From principles, we move more into the parable aspect. It's replete with stories of various gods and goddesses. And this is where, during the Puranic period, we find a very good reference. For the first time, we really see Kali appearing in the scene. And how she's described, I will read it from a book called Hindu Goddesses by David Kinsley. It is a very beautiful description, so I prefer to just read it verbatim. Kali's most famous appearances in battle context are found in the Devi Mahatma. Devi Mahatma is a Puranic text called the Markandeya Purana, which is all about Devi. In the third episode, which features Durga's defeat of Shumbha and Nishumbha and their allies, Kali appears twice. Early in the battle, the demons Chanda and Munda approach Durga with readied weapons. Seeing them prepared to attack her, Durga becomes angry. Her face becomes dark as ink. Suddenly, the goddess Kali springs from her forehead. She is black, wears a garland of human heads and a tiger skin, and wields a skull-topped staff. She is gaunt, with sunken eyes, gaping mouth, and lolling tongue. She roars loudly and leaps into the battle, where she tears demons apart with her hands and crushes them in her jaws. She grabs the two demon generals and in one furious blow decapitates them both with her sword. Later in the battle, Kali is summoned by Durga to help defeat the demon Raktabija. This demon has the ability to reproduce himself instantly whenever a drop of his blood falls to the ground. Having wounded Raktabija with a variety of weapons, Durga and her assistants, a fierce band of goddesses called the Matrikas, find they have worsened their situation. Raktabija is the name of a very fierce demon which Durga was having trouble defeating. Why? Because as Raktabija bleeds more and more profusely from his wounds, the battlefield increasingly becomes filled with Raktabija duplicates. Kali defeats the demon by sucking the blood from his body and throwing the countless duplicate Raktabijas into her gaping mouth. Quite a terrible description, isn't it, of a goddess? And that is the first appearance of goddess in the history of Indian religion. Yeah, so it is quite fierce. And that's how we first find the goddess of. And that is, in many other Puranas also, we see her appearing again and again more as a warrior. You know, whenever there's the need of a battle, she's called upon. She is the wrath aspect of the benign, otherwise benign goddesses. There's also there's another story about Sati in which she became so furious, then she had to be severed into many pieces. So there is many such descriptions that of Kali, which really brings terror in our minds. So from the Puranic period, this is how we see Kali during this period in the Puranas. And then we move into the period of the Tantras. Now the Tantras are in the 9th and 10th century. They are very intense on practices. In Tantra practice, or techniques for attaining salvation are of main importance. The Tantric scriptures emerged when India was dominated by Buddhistic influence. So, during the Puranic period, the Buddhism and Jainism became very prominent in India, to the extent that Buddhism almost took over most of the Vedic religious aspects and so forth. And it was when Buddhism was at its peak that Tantra kind of came more as a reaction. So there are tantras both in the Hindu and there are Hindu and Buddhistic schools. And we find that in the Buddhistic Tantra, which developed more in the Kashmir area, which is called the Kashmir Shaivism, there's mention of an aspect of Kali called Tara. And during soup supper, if you go down, Heidi has brought here a very nice photo of Tara, which is hanging in the hallway in the dining room. You'll see how much closely it resembles goddess Kali. So in the Buddhistic school of Tantra also we find the reference of Kali, but we'll focus on some of the aspects of Tantra and how the concept of Kali evolved in India during this period of the Tantra. In Tantric system, Kali becomes a very prominent divine figure. Till now, she was primarily thought as the wrath or the fierce aspect of Durga or other goddesses. She is meant only to intimidate and destroy the demons. The warrior goddess she is, but in Tantra, mainly in what is called the left-handed Tantrism, she emerged as a central divinity who can give liberation to the sadhaka or aspirant. So from more as a warrior or fighting goddess, she became the divine godhead who gives liberation. And for the first time, we see that aspect of Kali before us. Tantras emphasize on Shakti. This is another principle that we see very much prominent during the period of the Tantric period. Shakti pervades this creation with her power, might, and vitality. She is inseparable from the possessor of Shakti, who is called Shiva. Yet it's she who the aspirant can connect with and receive boons. She is the underlying reality of the aspirant's very being, and it is her vitality that the Tantric sadhaka, the practitioner of Tantrism, seeks through various rituals to attain spiritual transformation. The sadhaka's body, both physical and mental, becomes the instrument. So Tantra is very intense on rituals, and the concepts of mantra, of evolving spiritually using by the repetition of mantra, receiving initiation from guru, and the various techniques of meditation and worship that we see even here are all based on the tantric system. The practices in Tantra don't prohibit anything or anybody. So it is the tantric system, like I said, came as a reaction to the prevalent Vedic and the Buddhistic systems. So where there were some qualifications necessary, but in Tantra, it is the practices are for the masses. Everybody can practice those, and nothing is prohibited in the sense even the most vile things are also accepted there. The idea here is sublimation. Don't deny it is because by that time there has been some amount of degeneration probably happening from the Vedic age where sense enjoyment became more predominant. The mind was more on the gross plane, and so there was a lot of sense pleasures was very dominant. So instead of saying that do not just give everything up, Tantra said no need to give up, but sublimate, give it a spiritual turn. In fact, there are rituals, those are performed in the cremation grounds. Now, we know now that the cremation ground is the favorite place of the favorite dwelling of Kali. So instead of denying the fierce iconography of Kali, which is terror, death, destruction, the aspirant strives to propitiate her as the manifestation of Shakti and receive her boon to overcome fear, the greatest obstacle of spiritual unfoldment. So she is not fear. For the practitioner of Tantra, she is the one who destroys ignorance, one who destroys fear. This Tantra system noticeably flourished in Bengal, that's what we see, which I really don't know why, but there are in Bengal, you'll see a Kali temple probably every mile. So, that's how predominant it became. And the tantric practices were very, very much practiced all across the eastern part of India. And the practitioners were called Shaktas because they are worshipping Shakti. And so that's another thing we see in this evolution, that the Kali, who was mostly been thought as someone who kills the demons and so forth, is now a goddess who is still very fierce looking and so forth, very fear invoking, but at the same time she is all powerful, all pervading power, and she gives liberation. And then we come to what is called the period of bhakti or devotion, that is starting from the 15th century. There was a big surge of devotion, which kind of rippled all around, all over India, starting from the south to all over India. There was a huge wave of devotion. And what is devotion? It's basically love of God. It was all about love, enough of philosophy, enough of everything. Just love God, as God, someone dear and near to us. There was, and in this devotional wave, what we see in certain areas where Tantrism, Shakti was practiced, is that there is a turn in how Kali is looked at. She was by now the real, already the chosen ideal, and how she is approached. We see that in the devotional period for the first time, that her fierce appearance changes. She no longer looks fierce. A smile comes in her face. She's very soothing and with very compassionate eyes, smiling. Her hands, actually, one hand is in the posture which gives fearlessness. Abhay, and the other is giver of boons. So this, for the first time, we see during the devotional period, when for the first time Kali is looked upon as mother. So, and there are many saints also we see during this period, and they are like Ram Prasad and others. They write, for them, Kali is no longer some idol, somebody who gives someone out there whom you have to worship, but somebody very close to your heart. And they compose this many poems out of their devotion and so forth, and those are replete with these ideas of how Kali is just part of their life. You know, they see, they walk, and they play with Kali. So that's how. And through those songs, very, very, very high principles are also brought up. And we cannot study all the saints, but I think we can study one saint of the 19th century, and by studying him, we'll have a fairly good understanding of Kali. And that's Sri Ramakrishna. His very awareness was rooted in Kali, and in his divine moods, he always used to sing and reflect on the mystic songs of Kali composed by all the other saints like Ram Prasad, Kamalakanta, and so forth. So if we study him, we'll get a fairly, and that I would say, before we go any further, is kind of a culmination of our study of Kali, because we already reached the 19th century, and there the whole concept of Kali evolved, and how it did, we'll study now by seeing Sri Ramakrishna. Now here something interesting happens. Like we said, that the fierce-looking Kali is addressed as a mother. Now in Sri Ramakrishna, Kali was an all-comprehensive concept. He, as most of us know, that he was a priest at the Dakshineshwar temple where he worshipped Kali, and he was really known as the worshipper of Kali. And the chronicler of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, who was a very close disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, explained Sri Ramakrishna's concept of Kali. He says, but with him, the meaning of Kali is different. What the Vedas call the Supreme Brahman, he calls Kali. What the Musalmans call Allah, and the Christians call God, and we can add what the Jews call Jehovah, he calls Kali. He does not see many gods. He sees only one God. What the Brahmagyanis of olden times call Brahman, what the yogis call Atman, and the Bhaktas call the Bhagavan, he calls Kali. So that's where we see a new light on Kali. How and we will be, for rest of today, we'll be just focusing on this concept of Kali. Sri Ramakrishna's life is so unified with the concept of Kali. Then what can be a better medium to understand? So again, we go back to where we started, the principle, parable, and practice. Now, in Sri Ramakrishna's lives and teachings, all these three aspects can be seen with a lot of clarity. Many scholars, and even Swami Vivekananda, has described Sri Ramakrishna as the culmination or the fulfillment of thousands and thousands of years of spiritual practices of the mankind. So everything that evolved so far found expression in the personality of Sri Ramakrishna. So everything of divine motherhood that has evolved over the ages, we see culminate in Sri Ramakrishna. In him, we find the unification of the concepts and principles those originated during the Vedic period, the concepts of Shakti, Maya, and Prakriti. The concept of divine motherhood, unified in his awareness of Mother Kali. His life itself is an engaging parable of Mother Kali. Kali was his nearest and dearest, his mother. When he started to worship Mother Kali, he didn't worship some ideology in the idol of Kali, but to him, Kali was a living entity. He yearned to see her living presence. He was not satisfied to only see the stone image. After years of worship, when he failed to see thus, one day in utter despondence he snatched the sword from the idol's hand and was about to slay himself. And right then, Mother appeared before him in all glory as a living mother. And her living presence was since then in every moment of his experience. He used to think of him as her instrument. And every decision in life, small or big, he used to accept according to her will. His day-to-day awareness was so steeped in Kali, he used to see her in every human form, especially that of women. Once, while traveling in Kolkata, he saw some prostitutes standing by the road. He was a saint. Instead of turning away his face, he saluted them with folded hands and said, "I am seeing them as the Divine Mother, as Kali." And as he taught how to integrate our lives with the Divine Mother, just as he did. So what did he say? Have faith, depend on God. Then you will not have to do anything yourself. Mother Kali will do everything for you. Pray to the Divine Mother, and this is where we see the practice element. Pray to the Divine Mother with a longing heart. Her vision dries up all cravings for the world and completely destroys all attachment to woman and gold. It happens instantly if you think of her as your own mother. She is by no means a godmother. She is your own mother. With a yearning heart, persist in your demands on her. So now let us look again at the image of Kali and try to understand her significance through the experiences of Sri Ramakrishna, through the lens of Sri Ramakrishna, as you will. So her appearance, no doubt, is terrible, but terrible to whom? To those who are clinging to the fleeting pleasures born of ignorance. Our possessions, this body, if we analyze, is for a very limited time. These are destined to disappear in the womb of time. The more we cling to our material position, social status, house, beauty, wealth, and so on, the more we are in the grip of ignorance. We are in the grip of fear. And Mother Kali destroys that. She is the destroyer of ignorance. So we all along saw her as destroying. What has been she destroying in her warrior pose? She was really destroying our ignorance and enlightening our lives. But the moment we realize the ephemeral nature of this world and desire only for the permanent bliss, Kali dispels all our fear. We see her benign form, and she bestows knowledge and wisdom. Sri Ramakrishna says, bondage and liberation are both of her making. By her Maya, worldly people become entangled in woman and gold, and again, through her grace, they attain their liberation. She is called the savior and the remover of the bondage that binds one to the world. And then she doesn't wear any clothing as such. Why? Because clothing limits us. But she is limitless. That's why the entire universe is her clothing. About her dark complexion, again, that is a suggestion of her universal limitless form. What Sri Ramakrishna says is Kali my divine mother of black complexion? She appears black because she is viewed from a distance, but when intimately known, she is no longer so. The limitless sky appears at a distance, but look at it close by and you will find that it has no color. The water of the ocean looks blue at a distance, but when you go near and take it in your hand, you find that it is colorless. And then we come to the aspect that she's standing on Shiva. The fact that Kali is standing on Shiva itself is the ultimate vision of reality that we know in Vedanta. And this reality we do not see in any other forms of or any other images of gods and goddesses in the Hindu system. And what is that? It is the unified view of the fundamental principle of action and awareness as expounded in Vedanta. Two A's. One is action, the other is awareness. This is the unified view of Shiva and Shakti. Awareness is that which is unchanging, immovable, pure consciousness, also known as Brahman. Shiva means serene, and in Vedanta he represents pure awareness, the conscious principle. Shiva lies on the ground as an immovable corpse, but although not moving, he is not dead, but his consciousness itself. This Shiva is also referred as Brahman or Purusha in Vedanta, that unchanging because pure consciousness, pure awareness is beyond time. So there is no change. Change happens only in time. It's immovable because it pervades everywhere. He's present everywhere. So the question of motion or mobility doesn't arise. And Kali represents action, activity. Manifestation of life force, of power, Shakti. All changes, all attributes are in her. The universe originates in her, sustains in her, and gets destroyed in her. As such, she is called the Adya Shakti, or the primordial power. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, as long as we are aware of our individual existence, the little self, by the name and the form that I am, we are in the domain or in the jurisdiction of Adya Shakti. So, we must take refuge in whoever is the chief of the jurisdiction, that is Kali. It's nobody but her who has the keys of liberation. And he also explains the unique feature of this unity of Shiva and Shakti. They are not only eternally inseparable, but they are one. One in what sense? It's like the fire and its heat. Inseparable. Or milk and its white color. We can't think of milk without thinking of its whiteness, fire without thinking of its power to burn, or the sun's rays without thinking of the sun. In that sense, they are one. When inactive, it is called Brahman. Again, when creating, preserving, and destroying, it is called Shakti. Still water is an illustration of Brahman. The same water moving in waves may be compared to Shakti, Kali. What is the meaning of Kali? She who communes with Mahakala, the Absolute, is Kali. Again, these are the words of Sri Ramakrishna. She is formless, and again, she has forms. If you believe in the formless aspect, then meditate on Kali as that. If you meditate on any aspect of her with firm conviction, she will let you know her true nature. Then you will realize that not merely does God exist, but he will come near you and talk to you as I am talking to you. Have faith and you will achieve everything. That which is Brahman is Shakti, and that again is the mother. Sri Ramakrishna used to sing a song composed by Ram Prasad, and I'll just read the English version. These are Bengali songs. Who is there that can understand what Mother Kali is? Even the 6 darshanas, the various philosophies, the scriptures are powerless to reveal her. It is she, the scriptures say, that is the inner self of the yogi, who in self discovers all his joy. She that of her own sweet will inhabits every living thing. The macrocosm and microcosm rest in the mother's womb. The macrocosm refers to our individuality, the microcosm, and the macrocosm is the cosmos, the universe. Now, do you see how vast it is? So to truly understand Mother Kali, who is limitless, we can't cling to our limited awareness. We have to go beyond. How to do that? Sri Ramakrishna says, surrender to her. Surrender how? Not like a terrorist surrenders to the cops, but like a small child who knows of no other support other than his or her mother. Our ego that propels us in all different directions is like the Rakta Bija, whom Kali had destroyed, as we saw in the Puranas. The nature of Rakta Bija was as soon as his blood touches the ground, each drop gives rise to a new demon. So it is with our ego. Sri Ramakrishna says, we trim the branches of a tree, next day we see many small shoots appearing. So it's an endless process. The more we cut, the more it keeps alive. What's the solution? That's how ego is. It is beyond our capacity to destroy ego completely. So in this fight to destroy ego, let's take refuge in Kali. Let her destroy this ego, and we live as an instrument in her hands. And that is liberation, friends, in knowing we are the instrument and she is the doer. I am an instrument in the hands of the mother. And one last point I would like to say is that she is the universal mother. Although the concept of Kali we find appearing in Hinduism, she is not limited, or she does not belong to any particular religion as such. We can call her by any name, God, Allah, Jehovah, doesn't matter. What matters is our pure love and devotion and our self-surrender. Then she will slay our ego, our ignorance, with a sharp sword of wisdom and open the doors to eternal peace, bliss, and knowledge. So that's kind of the conclusion. But I just thought, why don't we conclude with a couple of minutes of contemplation of what we just discussed. So I invite you to close your eyes if you can. Sit comfortably and breathe gently. As we breathe in and out, as the air comes in and leaves our body, through this air we are connecting our small individual self with the world around us, with the universe. This universe of incessant changes. Every moment there are changes in sounds, in appearances, in our thoughts, our emotions. We are immersed in this change, in this incessant action, as if immersed in an ocean full of waves rising and falling every moment. And this ocean of action is Divine Mother, Shakti. I am immersed in this eternal action of Divine Mother, in this dance of Kali. I may call her by any name, God, Allah, Ishwar, doesn't matter. She is not far hidden somewhere. She is not some concept limited to the scriptures. She is very near to me. I am immersed in her. My experiences of joy, of miseries, elation, depression are all in her. I exist in her. She exists in and through me. Whenever I need her, she is right there. May I never forget her and always live in her company. May I always live in the presence of Divine Mother, Kali. Thank you, friends. And there's just 6 minutes left for any further discussion if you want to have them. Yes, please go ahead.
So you started off with a very intriguing video, and you know why CERN had chosen to display Kali and what was their connection to it?
Yeah, so it was actually, like I said, in August, the first week of August, that 6th August, as you know, I found out that 6th August, it is related to the first nuclear explosion that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So as to observe that, they chose how to observe it. So they chose to do the display and to bring the awareness that we have to fight the nuclear pollution and all kind of pollution. So that's where they brought the image of Mother Kali, which is kind of interesting. I would like to ask somebody from CERN why they chose Kali. Any other questions?
What's the relationship between Kali and Shiva? You mentioned that Vedic interpretation, but a more, dogmatic, Shiva is the husband of Kali.
Yeah,
And Durga is also
yes,
wife of Shiva.
right.
So what's the relationship?
Yeah. So as I was saying in the beginning, that in the Vedic age, that all these, when we're discussing the Vedic age, all these concepts of the goddesses, the godheads, the goddesses, Durga, Uma, Parvati, so forth, they are different aspects. We see their appearances, the stories connected to their lives, and so forth. But then there is an underlying unity. So there's this parable aspect, and below that there's the layer of unity, which is the principle. In principle, they are all one, divine mother, the Shakti. They are all manifestations of Shakti. And it is really the union of Shiva and Shakti. So union of Shiva and Shakti, meaning in that Shiva is really, in terms of form, there are also various stories about Shiva, but the real essence of Shiva is really the serene one, the pure consciousness. And it is really and in that sense, it is really Shiva and Shakti. So Durga, Kali, they are unified in Shakti. So basically, the triangle that I showed, the principle and parable, that makes it easier. That yes, there are many stories. We hear the story of Durga, we hear the story of Kali. They are different, really. They're different. They have different life stories. But that is only at the level of the story. If you go a level deeper, in principle, they are one, and they are Shakti. I didn't change your picture. Yeah, and that's what in the last section we discussed. Yes, actually I had the benign aspect of Kali. Probably I should have put that picture. So, like I said, in the devotion, after we reached the 19th century, 18th century, the figure of Kali is very different. She's wearing nice sari and jewelry and smiling face, and her hands has giving boon and so forth. Now, yes, that is changed, and that's what we discussed, that she's still standing on Shiva. She's still holding the sword in one hand. So it is the most important aspect of Kali, I would say, that never change, is that the manifestation of Shakti and the union with Brahman. Basically, like I said, in no other forms of the Godheads, you will find that Shiva is lying on the ground, and this is a very important concept, and I feel that is really the most unique concept that helps us to understand the cosmos as it is, the creation, the reality as it is. It is not just nothing. There is existence, and that existence is an unchanging awareness. So in us also we see there's a aspect which is just pure awareness, which is just witness. And there's another aspect which is changing, which is desiring which is always mobile, which wants to do something now, something different, which an aspect in time and in space, when there's movement. And then they are at the same time, they are one. They are not two separate things. They're completely inseparable. They are one in the sense of milk and its whiteness. Just in that sense. And that is the unchanging aspect of Kali.
In one or two words of English, can you just tell me in English one or two words of the absolute? You said Shakti and Shiva. No, Shakti and Shiva. So just give me one or two words of English that.
Yeah, power. Shakti is power. Yeah. And Shiva is awareness. Okay. So it's...
One aspect of Kali, or one representation of Kali, I think you said that, but just like to add that.
Please go ahead.
You know, is the concept of time. Kali represents time.
Mm-hmm.
If we stand and we think about it, the time devours everything. Time
Yes.
is devouring everything.
Yes.
You know, from ant to human being or building, civilization. So that the aspect of time,
Yes.
that's very much represented.
Yes. Yes.
As a destruction. Everything
Yes.
is getting destroyed at different times time scale.
Exactly. Yeah, that actually, that aspect, although I have it here, I did not mention, and that is the name, her name also. You know, her appearance, the form, and the name, Kali. Kali means the consort of Kala. Kala means time and death. They are actually synonymous. It's kind of intriguing how can death and time be synonymous. Like Pritishda said, they are synonymous in the sense it is time which destroys. You know, time is same as change, time is same as death and destruction. So that's the significance of her name, the consort of Kala. And also, Kal also means in some linguistic, the root Kal has this of darkness. So Kali also means the dark one. Thank you.